Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Goutham, A.V. Goutham got his bachelor's in science in physics, still photography, and audiovisual production. He got his master's in philosophy at the University of Pune in India. Goutham is an APPA and PPAI certified philosophical practitioner. PPAI is the Philosophical Practitioners Association of India. It's our sister organization in India. We helped get them started, and we co-taught the first cohort of philosophical counselors in this joint program. And Goutham was one of the first. He was in that cohort. So I'm very happy to see that he's now presenting here. Goutham's a writer, a filmmaker, a research consultant, and a negotiator. He has 15 years of this kind of cross-disciplinary experience that he brings to his work in philosophical practice. He has two offices, one in Pune and one in Mysore. Lately, Goutham has been focused on creating mental health awareness through philosophy, which sounds just like what our previous speaker was all about. Goutham speaks 5 languages. He has a broad set of philosophical and scientific and like multiply different forms of rational ways of thinking that he brings to his work, to his approaches in his work in philosophical counseling. So he's got a broad philosophical toolkit, which is kind of like my own style. Like I said, I met him during his training. I was one of the faculty members in that first cohort. I found Goutham's contributions there very keen, insightful, rich, and of very high quality. So it gives me great pleasure. I'm sure there are many more things to say about him, but let's instead just listen to what he has to say. Goutham, it's my pleasure to hand over the floor to you. It's great to see you again, my friend. Namaste.
Hello, everyone. I would like to start with my PowerPoint presentation. So can I share the screen now? So first of all, congratulations to all of us on the 25th anniversary of APA. Thank you for this great opportunity. I'd like to begin the discussion here. India has a very rich diversity of symbolism. As you can see on the screen, be it the political symbols, be it the national symbol, be it the social symbols such as the caste system, be it the religious symbols in the form of Dashara festival, nature symbols in the form of river worship, objects as symbols, as you can see with the dot on the forehead and the gesture of namaskar, which we just did, the cosmic dance of Shiva, or the more popular Bollywood dance as a popular culture. So symbols are the identifying marks of any culture. We use symbols for both concealment and revelation. My interest in this paper is limited to the symbolic interpretation of Bhagavad Gita that helps us understand its treatment of agency. See, the symbolism that underlies the Bhagavad Gita starts with its poetic beauty. The very first verse, Dharma-kshetre, kuru-kshetre. So taken as it is, it talks about a religious place known as Kurukshetra. It introduces us to the battlefield named Kurukshetra. Even today, you can find it on your Google map. But the language of Sanskrit allows us to read it as Kshetre, Kshetre, Dharmam Kuru. So we have 3 terms here, Kshetra, Dharma, and Kuru. The term Kuru is related to action. We will elaborate on that later as we proceed. So the terms Kshetra and Dharma, they have a range of meanings. Okay, so we'll not go into the detail of all the meanings. In our context, we take the terms to mean sphere and dutifulness respectively. So if Kurukshetra is the sphere of action, then Dharma-kshetra means the sphere of dutiful action. So hence in the very first verse of Bhagavad Gita, we have a concealed meaning of perform your duty in all walks of life. But interestingly, the scripture does not go any further, discuss any further about what those specific duties are, or what is right in itself. Rather, it tries to address the problem of knowledge and action, which is related to the dilemma of Arjuna there. So even in the case of this paper, more than the linguistic symbolism of this kind, I am interested in exploring the symbolic resource these concepts offer for understanding philosophical practice. Now, coming to the significance of philosophical practice, I want to make few important points here. Symbolism underlies philosophical practice at all times. Philosophical practice is rooted in the way of life. And the way it is conceptualized, the conceptualization of way of life, it varies with time, it varies with culture. And it is also a natural consequence of its theoretical visions. And most importantly, the agent's place keeps shifting with the meaning of life and the method of inquiry adopted. So the practical teaching of Bhagavad Gita is unambiguously aimed at making us realize or emphasizing on the value and importance of being an agent. Subsequently, the theoretical visions of its time are critically concerned about the meaning of knowledge and action, the trade-off between them, and their role in bondage and liberation. This paper, Dialogical Metaposition in the Symbolism of Bhagavad Gita, aims to show that the client approaching for counseling signifies a closed relation to agency or a weakened agency. The counselor plays an instrumental role in restoring this agency. I found that this problem can be examined best at the intersection of knowledge and action, which happens to be the very setting of Bhagavad Gita. Also, Bhagavad Gita serves as a dialogically rich symbolic resource to demonstrate this idea. And the dialogical self-theory provides the necessary conceptual framework. So I have explored the content of Bhagavad Gita in terms of dialogical self-theory. And I have tried to show how the specific position of the counselor translates into a dialogical metaposition in the client's external domain, and how it is helpful to philosophical practice. So let us start with Arjuna's moral dilemma. For those who are not aware, Arjuna is one of the main heroes of the Mahabharata war. Krishna, the avatar of God, his charioteer, his guide, they are stationed in between two armies consisting of near and dear ones on both sides. This is the setting in which Bhagavad Gita is discussed. So, like we discussed, the place given to the agent during this period is based on a normative framework of dharma. That is, it is based on the social and moral order of individual actions. So here is Arjuna's dilemma. He knows that he is standing by the side that represents righteousness, but the unrighteous side he is fighting against is not a random enemy, but his own clan with many near and dear ones. So he knows that it is his duty to uphold righteousness or dharma and hence fight even in this situation. But he desires to possess the kingdom and enjoy it with those very people whom he is supposed to kill to attain the kingdom. So he has a very clear conflict between wish and will. As the agent, he has to will the war of dharma, the war of righteousness. But this is against his wish or the end he desires. So to escape this difficulty, he proposes an even higher ideal, then dharma or righteous action that was popular during those times. The renunciation of all actions, sannyasa. So he believes that he can achieve freedom from karma by choosing inaction and attain perfection of knowledge through the mere act of renunciation. But this does not solve his problem, because he has not developed real dispassion, which is required for total renunciation or sannyasa. He has to act against his nature. That is another point. He has to act against his nature to be dispassionate. Moreover, this model of action is not suitable to his natural disposition. He being a warrior, and we'll come to that. So it is not suitable to his natural disposition. So he gets confused about his individual responsibility as an actor. So he stands here at the intersection of action and inaction, knowledge and ignorance. As per the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's knowledge is incomplete. However, he cannot complete it by acquiring further information. So we cannot call it half knowledge. Speaking of half knowledge, Abhimanyu, another great warrior, had half knowledge. So he knew how to penetrate a very terrific battle formation known as Chakravyuha, but he did not know his way out. So he dies fighting valiantly. Arjuna knows his way in and out, but he is finding it hard to accept that action is inescapable, even if he chooses inaction, because of the clash between his wish and will. So he's finding hard to accept that, firstly, and rather by properly directing his actions, there is a scope for realizing what he's become aware of. For all this, he has to first act. His knowledge of renunciation as a means of freedom from karma is therefore neither half knowledge nor a true realization. The inner conflict between wish and will is not limited to Arjuna or his particular situation, but extends to us all. To explain the significance of this thing to philosophical practice, I have applied the term informed ignorance here in a new sense. Usually, informed ignorance is spoken of in terms of acquiring the necessary knowledge or complementing with a knowledge and not stopping or overloading with information. Now, this is a different kind. We will understand it as we go further. This informed ignorance is related with practice, which is a completely different category, action, which is a completely different category, and knowledge being a completely different category in this philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. So, and I have tried to show how we can arrive at this concept of information, informed ignorance through a dialogical process, and how this understanding helps the clients to reorganize their view and arrive at a model of action that would be in line with their own value system. Another important concept closely related to informed ignorance is agentive thinking. Once again, this is another new term I have tried to introduce in this paper, maybe not entirely new, but used in a new sense. So an agentive thinker is one who undertakes action to attain freedom from action. That is what is Arjuna's aspiration, to be free from action. But inaction is not the way. So he has to be an agentive thinker. Agentive thinker is one who undertakes action to attain freedom from action. This seems counterintuitive, but this will be covered later on. Now, freedom from action is impossible without freedom from desire. But will to act without desire is another impossibility. Therefore, for an agentive thinker, I have argued in my paper that thinking is the action. Action is the result. And subscribing to the philosophy of Gita, divine service is the enjoyment. We can call it dutiful service, because this philosophy proposes duty for duty's sake. So as agentive thinker, an agentive thinker derives the necessary will to act from the higher self, which is free from all desires, and subsequently dedicates the results to it. We are free to determine our higher self, God, duty, so on. So Bhagavad Gita teaches us that one should realize to the full that he is a doer, he is an agent. He should altogether forget that he is the enjoyer. So I have tried to explain these concepts of agentive thinking and informed ignorance better through the framework of dialogical self-theory. Now, Arjuna's inner discord, it is not just an independent clash between wish and will. Education, cultural, social norms, emotional experiences, values and ideals, and all these factors are acting on him. He undertook to fight with the consciousness of a new and higher ideal, dharma. But in terms of self-development, he has not gone beyond the notions corresponding to I, me, and mine. So they still dominate his mind. His self has developed under the influence of these ideals. His old ideals, such as preservation of dynasty, and lower motives such as enjoyment of the kingdom, these remain quite unexamined. These remain intact. Only now, in this situation, he suddenly finds himself in a very uncommon situation where the internalized voices of these influences turns into what I call an insecure self-talk. To understand how the narrative structure of the self takes shapes, how it takes the shape from here on, we shall refer to the dialogical self-theory. So in this paper, I have mainly referred to the dialogical self-theory of Dr. Hubert Hermans. This theory postulates a polyphonic self that is comprised of a multiplicity of inner voices. These voices are not limited to personal positions, but are extended to the mental representations of culture, family members, friends, and significant others. So these are known as I positions. Okay. So they form relatively autonomous points of view within the self, and they are engaged in a dialogical relationship with each other and the actual others. So and they exchange knowledge and information and experiences about their respective me, creating a complex, multi-voiced, narratively structured self known as dialogical self. So as per the dialogical self theory, we can map Arjuna's dialogical self across three areas: the personal positions that form the personal and social positions that form the internal domain of the self. I as a brave warrior, I as disinclined to fight. Then the significant other individuals or groups are placed in the external domain of the self, such as my kingdom, my swadharma, and so on. So the larger society or the macro society, consisting of the actual individuals and groups, the warriors such as Bhishma, Drona, and even Krishna until he is incorporated into the external domain as my guide or my counselor. So these form the macro society. So the internal and the external domains constitute the mini society of the self. So Hubert Hermans argues that rather than being influenced by the macro society directly, the self functions as a mini society of I positions. So this is the background. So as we can see in that diagram, so external and internal domains of the self, Arjuna, there is a dialogical space in the form of a rectangle where I, me, and mine, these things created the problem. Arjuna faced confusion, and there was an inclusion from outer society in the form of Krishna. This place is taken by the counselor later on. So then it gives rise to clarity. So this is the live dialogical space in which all these things are happening. Now, Arjuna's insecure self-talk, we discussed about it. He enters into an insecure self-talk. So it takes the form of an internal dialogue between these various I positions. I as declining to fight, I as a Kshatriya, brave warrior, but declining to fight, my grandfather, but is standing on the opposite side of the enemy. So there are there is an exchange, internal dialogical exchange between these various I positions, exchanging stories from their specific points of view, creating affectively charged attachments. And as they unfold, there is an eruption of I positions. So, and these I positions, it is important to note that they are organized into, they work in coalitions. They don't work in isolation. So sometimes they may organize into maladaptive coalitions, like in the case of Arjuna, and cause a distress. Even though all this is a natural and a healthy process, it has an emotional element to it. So the differences or conflicts between various voiced positions has led to what we call a dialogical tension. So the dominant coalition of I positions here, there is a dominant coalition and there is a sensible coalition. Here the dominant coalition is, as the name suggests, it is working. So the dominant coalition of I positions has failed to adapt to a new and confusing situation. Arjuna ends up despondent and declining to fight. So symbolically speaking, the two armies are like his own self divided. He's standing between those two armies. For he himself is his friend, he himself is his enemy. To quote from the Gita, Atma iva yatmano bandhur, Atma iva ripuratmanah. So he is himself his friend and he is himself his enemy. It's a dialogical tension. So Arjuna's default responses are no longer bringing positive meaning or direction. He has reached the boundary of his existing self-concept. It is not always a negative experience. Okay, it can be a positive boundary experience, but in this case, it is a negative boundary experience. So he's becoming more and more different from himself, and this is what I call weakening of agency. Now, a boundary experience, whether positive or negative, it demands reconfiguration within the dialogical self. This takes us back to our discussion on informed ignorance and agentive thinking. Arjuna has not mastered the self on the lines of his consciousness of a higher ideal. The higher self refuses to subordinate to the lower self. I mean, I'm just using the terms to make it easy. So it refuses to subordinate. But the lower self at the same time does not have the wings to make sudden changes, take a flight. So therefore, he faces this conflict, the consciousness of a higher ideal, but no mastery of the self on the same lines. So this creates the serious conflict between wish and will. But it is in the awareness of this conflict that the possibility of the right choice lies for him. And this is what Bhagavad Gita also is trying to say. So this is where the concepts of informed ignorance and agentive thinking are of great aid to philosophical counseling. Arjuna is not philosophically equipped to articulate his boundary experience. That is another point. Because of the weakening of agency, is unable to articulate it. And articulation of the boundary experience plays a very crucial role in developing counterpositions to the maladaptive coalitions. So right now he is philosophically not equipped to articulate his boundary experience. So he ends up feeling with a feeling of inability to cope. So even if it is a positive boundary experience, it demands the reconfiguration within the dialogical self and hence creates a lot of distress, and it can be misinterpreted as a feeling of inability to cope. That is what happens with Arjuna. Now, the view of self as a as dialogically extended, as we saw in the diagram, the view of self as a dialogically extended to the independent other, allows other new people, actual people who can make a difference, to cross the open boundaries of the self and enrich it. So Arjuna reaches out to Krishna for consolation, support, and clarity. So according to the dialogical self theory of Hermans, Krishna is the actual other, is incorporated into the dialogical space as another I. Now, there is a slight difference here in William James's view. This I other forms a subject-object relationship. Hermans upgrades this to the subject level so that a dialogical relationship becomes possible. So, Krishna as the actual other is incorporated into the dialogical space as another I. He is placed in the external domain of the dialogical self as my constant friend or my revered teacher from whom I as a disciple can learn. So these are put in terms of various I positions. So as counselors, though we don't play God, we humbly occupy the same space through a dialogical relationship with the client. We are granted a subject position in a dialogical extension to an independent other. And this is a position which can be influenced during counseling. So through this specific position, when we try to help the client narrate his thoughts, beliefs, behavior, and all these things, so we invite them to articulate. So this specific position can function as a counter position to the dominant coalition that has led to the maladaptive organization of the self. So we can collaborate with crucial positions in the client, the sensitive positions which are not dominant but are sensitive. So we can act to collaborate with such crucial positions in the internal domain, working towards a more adaptive coalition. So all this is possible. This corresponds to two mutually complementing movements in the self in Hubert Herman's theory: centering movements that are unifying, coherence promoting, and organizing, and decentering movements that are multiplying, diversifying, and disorganizing. In a counseling setting, both these movements can be put to effective use. Now, another important feature of dialogical self-theory here is the idea of metaposition. So, metaposition provides an overview of multiple perspectives within one reality. It serves as a symbolic view from where organization of the existing and new positions can be seen, questioned, restructured, and most importantly, acted upon. So it is like creating a space of possibility. So it helps open fresh and new ways to articulate. That is important. So subsequently, the development of a metaposition helps reopen the closed boundaries of the self. So by valuing the other's perspective, Arjuna has created interconnected platforms in his dialogical space. Okay, and he has provided an access, important access, to a broader associative and organized network of I positions. A counselor can work this space of possibility through a process of positioning, counterpositioning, repositioning, by introducing new concepts and views and generate a very personal, meaning-giving experience to the client. I have tried to study this idea through one such platform built by Bhagavad Gita, the concept of nishkama karma, or the way of selfless action ensuing from self-knowledge. The concept of nishkama karma, I have processed it through a series of positions and counterpositions in the dialogical space of Arjuna. Due to the time limit, we can consider, I think, only an example here. The position that performing actions is the only means to freedom from action. We discussed it earlier. The proposition that performing actions is the only means to escaping actions seems counterintuitive. But there is a counterposition to that, saying that but to restrain from external action while dwelling mentally on the objects is hypocritical. So I cannot go into much detail here. So I have explored many positions and counterpositions leading to a metaposition. So here our important guide to the development of this dialogical metaposition in the symbolism of Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna's 18 questions. He asks 18 questions in the whole scheme of Bhagavad Gita. Basically, it is one question: how can I kill these people who are my own and enjoy the kingdom? So it takes different forms as the underlying philosophical issues start emerging. So I'll take an example. So he had asked himself, when even before the dialogical process started, he was having an insecure self-dialogue, I said. So what need do we have of a kingdom or enjoyments to be derived from killing my own people in the battle? He is not even expecting an answer. So after it is led to the concept of, when he opened himself to the perspective of others, and new concept was introduced, which was processed through positions and counterpositions, and some repositioning occurred. So the question changes. Okay, so his underlying assumption was that when he asked this first question in a monological voice, so his underlying assumption was that the family ties or the dynasty and all these people, they were everlasting. They were sanātanāh. He says kula-kshaye, pranaśhyantikula-dharmāh, sanātanāh. Kula-dharmāh means the dynasty and tradition. So this is what he regards as everlasting. So he develops his question later on when he realizes further. In fact, one important point is that when he not only says that this is sanātanāh, but also uses this as an excuse for his inaction. So now the counterposition which develops in the course of dialogue is that the sanātanāh, when it is everlasting, should be indestructible and immutable. Therefore, the kula-dharmāh cannot be sanātanāh. So when these things, positions and repositions, counterpositions happen, so he upgrades his question to, if this kind of wisdom is superior to action, why can't I just opt out of action altogether? So the notion of sanātanāh, I have taken this example, has translated the alternative voice of the person in the external domain, Krishna here, into a dialogical metaposition, and created a sense of possibility for imagining even more perspectives. So this process helps Arjuna to give a meaningful dialogical response to his dialogical tension. And it also empowers him to have a more fruitful disagreement with himself while developing new and open ways of thinking about his situation and discover flexible ways of acting on it. So it helps him ultimately find his own authentic voice and restore his closed relation to agency. So another important thing which happens here is that the choices of the client, which we talk about, so they are not like empty choices. They are choices with implications that we give here. In Arjuna's case, he is disinclined to fight, and for sannyas which he wants to take, or renunciation of actions, he is not qualified. For inaction, he is overqualified. He is a great thinker and a warrior. So obviously, the swadharma, or performing his duty, which was natural to those times, was his only choice. But when we say we give a possible choices to the client, it is about possible choices fertile with implications. So Arjuna's only choice here is swadharma, or performing his duty by resolving his conflict between wish and will. But then he has to understand what it implies for him. It has to be in line with his value system. So these are the things which I have explored in this paper. So finally coming to the conclusion, so I wanted to give a sort of disclaimer here. The dialogical self-theory discussed in the paper is not to be taken as a whole representation of the self, but only to develop the view of the self as a whole. Similarly, on the same lines, Bhagavad Gita is not invoked here to solicit for the absolute truth, but only as a compass for guiding the philosophical exploration of the client. So I hope this study offers philosophical practitioners from all across the globe a metaposition to reflect on their dialogical relationship with the client. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to AV. Thank you so much. Rick, are you going to carry on and please moderate the Q&A if you're still with us?
Sure, I am here. Patrizia has her hand up, so we'll go to her first. Patrizia?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So thanks a lot, Goutham. I really appreciate your presentation, really. And for me, especially, it's very, very useful because it makes me nearer to the Indian philosophy, which is still a fantastic big field that for the majority, very unknown, still very unknown. I feel more comfortable in the Western philosophy, but Indian is something that I'm approaching slowly. And so really, thanks a lot. And I really appreciate the relationship between this interpretation of this multi-voice dimension of the self, which you identify in Bhagavad Gita, and the parallelism that you make with Hubert Ehrman's. And I like the metaphor of the voices. We are many voices inside, which reminds me of the theory of our being as multi-roles. So instead of the metaphor of voice, which are inside us, as you have clearly explained, we are we are made of lots of roles. So each of us, for example, of course, we are playing lots of roles in our daily life. We are professors and teachers, and if we are parents, we have parents of children, but we are also children of our parents, and we have different roles. And each role, I've written many years ago an article on this, and each role has three dimensions, main dimension, then other sub-dimension, but each role has a sort of social role, because we are under the side of other people. We are under expectation. If we are a professor, they expect from us to be educative and then good and ethically oriented and effective in our role of professional. If we are a doctor, people expect for us to get healed and sane. And so there is a social dimension and there is a formal dimension. Of course, we all have a sort of, we all respond to norms and laws and rules, and we have a uniform in a way. So you are a policeman, you have to be recognizable. There is a representation and aesthetic aspect of the role. And then there is an individual role, which you have quite analyzed. There is I am unique, I am myself. Also being a teacher or a journalist or a parent or a mother or a son, I am myself. So this multiplicity of roles and the multiplicity of dimension of the role make everything very complex. And so I really like your parallelism between the multi-voices in ourselves with Hubert that you quote and Gadamer in the end. And it reminds me of Habermas, for example, in Germany, who went deeply into this communicative dimension of the human being. And this our being immersed in many roles, which are sometimes they conflict to each other, because what the law expects from us is not our own belief or our own trust. So this contradiction and complexity make this concept of self very, very complex. So really, thanks a lot for your presentation, and very inspiring.
Very much, and I request you to read my paper also, because I couldn't cover all the complexity of the discussion in this. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Before we go to the next hand, I'm not sure if there is a hand up, because with the the three people of us in the spotlight here. I can't see all the other.
Tom's hand is up.
Okay, so before we go to Tom, I just wanted to remind folks using the chat. The chat is only open for people who want to make comments directly to Professor Wang, not for a kind of sidebar conversations, which started to happen. So, this only makes it more difficult for us who are monitoring the chat. We ask you to please stop doing that. Okay, so and before we go to Tom, I just want to say one thing myself, take the moderator's privilege here. Goutham, just for future versions of this presentation, if you give them in the West, in the same way that maybe all Western philosophers know about Plato's cave and about the line and the forms, those things, right? Many Westerners have heard of the Bhagavad Gita. They don't know much about Dharma, sanātanāh, Krishna, Arjuna. You might want to give a little bit of an overview, or whenever you use any of those specialized terms, just kind of explain them. All right, that's a little bit of, okay, that's all I wanted to say. Oh, and one more thing, just before I forget, there's another method of psychological therapy, psychotherapeutic work called internal family systems that you might want to look into, which divides up the self into a variety of different parts. This sounds very similar to what you were presenting on. Okay, I thought this might help you in your future work. All right, Tom.
Hi there, and Goutham, thank you so much for your paper. I really, really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you several other thoughts as well as you, Rick, whether it's from Goutham or the Habermas or in the family role tradition. My question was about the text and role of the Bhagavad Gita as a narrative or as a traditional cultural form, like Plato's dialogues. So obviously you can have dramas that are portrayed theatrically on stages or in films or TV shows, like the Mahabharata has been, and so on. And you can have people doing oral recitations, like with Homeric or all sorts of epic poetry has been done by single speakers to audiences. And likewise, we can have just people reading the texts, like we have with Plato or the Bhagavad Gita, and you go as a good student and you read the lines of Krishna and Arjuna and think about it independently. Or you might do that with a teacher. And so I'm curious about the way that your role, your interpretation of the dialogical the emergence of a new position on the counselor, the counselor offering that role for the client, is being performed by the text of the Bhagavad Gita, or in what way you think traditionally or historically the narrative structure or the text itself of the Bhagavad Gita is doing something for the reader or the client, so to speak, of the person who's reading it. And whether you have any thoughts about that, like what's the Bhagavad Gita doing? Obviously not being alive, being a text, doesn't have a mind, right? But it can't speak, but it's there playing a certain kind of relationship. So there are different ways the Bhagavad Gita can be encountered and dealt with, like just as a book. So I wonder if you have thoughts about that. Thanks.
The Bhagavad Gita is not a dialogue, though it is popularly called as the dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. So it is not written in the form of a proper dialogue in which you have an equal share. So if we consider Arjuna as the counselor, he gets only like few 50 or some verses to say in a 700 verse text. So that is not the angle I have taken. I have not considered Krishna as the counselor and Arjuna as the... Yes, I have considered Arjuna as the counselee, but not Krishna.
Sorry, I didn't mean to say that Krishna is the counselor. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita is the counselor.
No, Bhagavad Gita is just a very rich symbolic resource from which we can draw a lot of positions and counterpositions and metapositions. We can apply it to any situation, any client. Here, the application to Arjuna is what I have done in the paper, because he is already in a situation. So I have directly applied it to him. So I am considering Bhagavad Gita only as a symbolic resource of maladaptive positions and centering and recentering movements, counterpositions, positions, and concepts which can be introduced in the space of possibility. So this is the limit to which I have explored in the paper.
All right.
Any thoughts historically? That's thanks.
I just want to call attention to the fact that we are at the 45-minute mark. So this is supposed to be the end of this session. So I'm going to thank you, Goutham, for your wonderful presentation. Great to see you again. And turn it over to Lou.
Thank you, Rick, for moderating this. We're going to have you back again this morning. We'll take a short break now until 10 a.m. It's 13 minutes. I hope that's enough for your coffee or whatever you're going to imbibe at this point. But we have this morning the international portion of the program, China represented, India represented. After our coffee break, we'll come back with Claudia from Italy, and then our friend Ibrahim from Turkey/USA. So we're going to have more to come this morning from the international scene. Enjoy your coffee, everyone. And please come back promptly at 10 a.m. Or is it 11? I'm sorry, 11 a.m. New York time. Yes, we can't come back at 10. We passed that. Okay, 11. We'll see you in 13 minutes. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
See you shortly. Thanks, AV. Great paper.